All right. Hello, everybody. I hope you all are doing well. Day after Thanksgiving, feeling pretty good. I hope everyone else is. Dixon, I already see you in the chat. Pool, I think you mean jig. He's still a jig in your book. You know, we got to get off the pool hate. It's Thanksgiving. We're all feeling good now. Let's go into the holiday season with some love. We got to love pool a little bit more now. So let's switch it up. I see you. It looks like your own buddy. We'll get there. We'll talk about him. Michael Ortiz, nice, taking down a contest on Yahoo yesterday. Yeah, and Thanksgiving was pretty good for me too, guys. NFL was really strong. Domination Station crushed. Was pretty. I'm not gonna say easy, but if you didn't change too much, you had a top 100 line pretty easily. So it was a good night all around. But anyway, on this show, we talk about the previous slate, and then we look at this slate, game plan for guys who want to be over the field on, under the field on, stuff like that. We didn't have basketball yesterday, so we're just going to jump right into today's slate. And then, of course, at 5:30 p.m., we have our pre-lock show, which is for VIP members only. Don't forget, link in the description, 10% discount. Use promo code BOB for that. All right, first up, we have this Bulls game against the Toronto Raptors. The biggest thing for the Bulls is Zach LaVine. He's listed as questionable currently. Honestly, guys, I'm not playing the Bulls if Zach LaVine plays. If Zach LaVine is out, we're playing DeRozan. We're playing Vucevic. We're playing White. Patrick Williams is very viable on this slate if LaVine is out. Yeah, I think that's really the way that I would want to think about it and go about it. So, not interested currently, but thankfully this is one of the first games on the slate, and so Zach LaVine should be showing up a bit more for us after, or we'll know a lot more about what we're doing for this Bulls team once we get to Zach LaVine news. All right. Next up, we have the Toronto Raptors. This team is a bit more interesting to me. And if it wasn't obvious, guys, we're only looking at the main slate here. We're not looking at the early games. The contests on DK tonight are not great for basketball, but I'm 20 maxing tonight because of that. It's the only contest that's paying out decently where you're not spending a ton of money. So that's what I'm doing. But anyway, back to the Raptors. Not a lot of injury news here. Thad Young is questionable. Achua is questionable. We did see Chris Boucher have a decent game last time out when Precious Achua was out. Worth noting that. Worth keeping a lookout for that Precious Achua news. But I'm not overly excited about those plays, at least currently. I do like Pascal Siakam. We've been on him for a while this season, and he's finally starting to put some good games together where I feel like we can keep going back to him here. The Bulls, not a team I typically like to pick on too much, but Siakam's still only 8,200, and he makes a lot of sense here in this spot. Scotty Barnes has been in fantastic form. We know he has been very consistently hitting 40 points or more on DraftKings here recently. So I'm totally fine with him as a play, but I don't love the upside at the price tag he's at. At 8,700, there's other guys like a bit more in that price range. I'll give you guys a little bit of a cheat code. Anthony Edwards is one of those guys, and he's literally the exact same price. So hard for me to prioritize Barnes when I like Edwards a lot more. So we have Siakam, check. Schroeder, yeah, I think there's other guys we can get to who are better plays at the point guard position that's even cheaper and or paying up. Dennis Schroeder's just kind of like a lineup fill, but not a guy I want a ton of exposure to. Jakob Poeltl is that sneaky play that I think has plenty of upside here at only 5,900. Again, we've been on him for a while here. Not a guy we're going crazy on, but I do want to make sure I have some good exposure. Outside of that, not loving the other pieces here. It's really Siakam, Jakob Poeltl for me, and moving on. JJ, what's up, man? Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Next up, we have the Heat against the Knicks. This is another team, guys. It's just really going to matter what we get from an injury news standpoint. Right now, we have Bam Adebayo listed as questionable. We have Duncan Robinson listed as questionable. Pretty obvious. We saw what happened for this team last time. Was it Wednesday when Bam Adebayo was out? Kyle Lowry saw a nice increase in usage. Of course, Jimmy Butler sees an increase in usage, and we get more exposure to guys like Thomas Bryant and even Oscar Robinson if Bam Adebayo ends up getting ruled out. If him and Duncan Robinson are out, I'm going to have a lot more exposure to the Heat than I would prefer, just because these guys, if you've been playing DFS for long enough, they can crush you. But I do think it could be interesting. And JJ, you're right. It would be silly for me not to mention Kevin Love. He's been in and out of the lineup. I would be a bit more excited about him if Bam and Duncan Robinson are out. But I agree, he's worth mentioning. So if everyone's healthy, honestly, similar to the Bulls, not touching them. But if we get some injury news here, we can have some value to get to some of these interesting pay up options in some of the later games. So could be an interesting slate. We'll know pretty early. Lock is at 7:30 p.m. today, so we have a little bit more time to adjust to some of this news, but gotta keep a sharp eye out for it. Next up, we have the Knicks. Evan Fournier is questionable. I don't really care about that. Don't love this spot for the Knicks. Don't like picking on Miami too often anyway. There's just a solid defensive team. Yeah, I don't foresee myself getting here unless we get some random injury news like the Knicks do like to do every now and again. So we'll see. All right, the next few games are a bit more interesting, and you can even tell that just by looking at the totals on these games. Is really the questionable tags that are keeping the earlier games on the slate viable. But we know this. We love seeing the Pacers on a DFS slate. We like attacking these guys. We do it pretty consistently, and we have good upside with that. So, with that being said, Cade Cunningham is looking like he's going to be super chalk on this slate, and it's hard for me to argue against it. He's only 7,800. Let's see. He's been decent this season. We saw him just crush against Denver, which we were on him as a play, which is great. But still, he's been solid this season. Matchup against the Pacers is a plus matchup. Hard for me to find a reason to not play Cade Cunningham. So this is chalk I'm not trying to fade. When it comes to Asar Thompson, I think he could be interesting here as well. The only thing that I always go back and forth on when it comes to Asar is, let's see here. 19% usage rate isn't bad. It really just comes down to efficiency. So, like, in his last 3 games, we haven't seen him score over 30 fantasy points, whereas before, he was hitting that pretty consistently. He even had 40, almost 50-point upside in some even non-optimal game environments. He has upside is basically what I'm trying to get to. So I'm keeping a close eye on his ownership. 9% seems appropriate. If it starts to fall a little bit, if we get more interesting value, if people are using the mid-range a bit less, I would be a little bit more interested in Thompson. But I do think he's viable. Duran also in play. Stewart don't love as much. Don't foresee myself getting there. Jaden Ivey is also looking like a very chalky player on this slate. So let's look at Jaden Ivey's recent production. Starting 21% usage rate. Hasn't surpassed 30 points this entire season outside of one game against OKC. He was out for 4 games or so in the middle of the season. Jaden Ivey is not someone I'm looking to prioritize on this slate. But again, I do like the matchup. So if I get exposure to him naturally, I'm fine with it. But ideally, we'll have better options available. So not my favorite spot. Really, the guy I'm looking at here is Cade Cunningham, and Thompson potentially as a GPP play. Next up, we have Pacers against the Pistons. Shocker. I think probably the thing that shocked me the most when I looked at this slate was Halliburton's new price tag on DK. Going from upper 9K range to being in the 10K range to just right at 11K really just emphasizes how good this guy has been this season. And even when you just look at ownership, people are playing him. Like, he's not an insane play by any means. This is the second highest total game on the slate, 7.5 point spread. We've seen Halliburton crush in scenarios like this. It's more so that now he's priced for that type of production. So I'm not as excited about Halliburton tonight. I understand him. I understand why people are playing him. I don't foresee myself doing the same thing. Again, if I get some naturally, that's fine, but there's other pay up options on the slate I like a bit more, which we'll get to. Turner, not excited about it. I know, even Dixon, you touched on it too. You're playing Hill today. He's been decent. He's had, was it 2 games he's finally put together now? And I'm just double checking. Yeah, that 50-pointer against the Raptors the other night. Played 30, 35 minutes. Just so you all know, like this guy, his minutes have been all over the place this season, but it does seem like he's starting to get a bit more consistent and the team seems to be trusting him a bit more. It makes me nervous, I'm not going to lie, but he makes sense at this point. I want to find a reason to try and fade him, but the only logical reason for it would be if the coaching staff decides to do what they've done so far this season and switch up rotations again, and Buddy suddenly does not see 30 minutes. But if the last 2 games are the new normal for this team, then it's almost impossible to not play Buddy Hield at 5,500. He just makes a ton of sense. So nervous, but it's logical, so I can't even call it stupid at this point. But I do think it's still a viable contrarian play to not play Hield tonight, just because the minutes have been all over the place this season, even though it's looking like it's getting back on track here. Anyway, probably playing Hield. We'll talk more about that on the pre-lock show. Again, 5:30 p.m., VIP members only. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe. We're almost at 20,000 subscribers, so we're growing. We're doing well out here. Hopefully, we can keep it going for you guys. So if you could support the show that way, it helps a lot. But let's move on. We have this Kings against the Timberwolves game. You all know the Timberwolves have been a solid, really good defense this season. Not a team I'd like to pick on too much, but I'm not trying to get Sabonis. I'm not getting to Fox. I do think this could be a decent Chris Duarte day where a lot of people were playing him on Wednesday. I don't believe we got there. You guys know my memory's not always the best. I don't think we played him on Wednesday. But with Chris, he's someone that got into foul trouble last game, so he didn't see as many minutes, and so that explains why his minutes weren't that high. But I think it's safe to assume that with him now in the starting lineup with Keegan Murray out, and as long as he actually is in the starting lineup once again, at 3,900, he's a very viable value play on this slate. Someone that I'm hoping doesn't get too chalky by the time we get to lock, but he's someone that is going to be on my radar, and I don't want to forget about him. Trey Lyles, I'm assuming he was the guy who saw a decent game on Wednesday instead. Yeah, he scored 22 points, played 27 minutes, coming back from injury. So, interesting spot for him as well. I want to dig a little bit deeper. The ownership is what's making me want to dig a little bit deeper into him and making sure that those minutes are secure. It's just hard. We don't have a large sample size on Lyles here, but it does seem like the $3,300 price tag is too cheap. So the way this slate is looking right now is that these are going to be your value options if we don't get any better value as the day goes on. Interesting spot. David said, why is Trey Lyles projected to do? Looks like we have him at projected around like 19 points or so, maybe a little bit less. I have a like on him, so I'm sure that changed it. But he did score 22 points in his last game against the Pelicans, so I'm not overly concerned. It's just hard to trust the minutes for certain. Hopefully, we have him projected for 23 minutes right now with his points per minute production. It looks like he'll be a decent play, even if he doesn't see 27 minutes again. So we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, value options from this game. I'm not playing the pay up options unless we get weird injury news here. Just like everyone's priced pretty appropriately for the role they play. All right. Next up, we have the Timberwolves. Now, I am more comfortable picking on the Kings from a offensive standpoint. The Timberwolves, not really any major injury news here, but I love this price tag on Anthony Edwards, 8,700. We know the upside he brings to the table. I like the matchup against the Kings. Nice game total, and also the second closest spread on the slate. So one thing I like to look at is looking for high game totals, but also close spreads. And the spreads aren't all that close on this slate, but there is at least one game with like a decent total and spread. There's really two, but I do like the Timberwolves side of this game. So Anthony Edwards is someone I want to make sure I have exposure to. He's not going under the radar by any means. If he stays around 18% projected ownership, I'll probably just want to stay around that with being around 20%, but we'll see how that changes throughout the day. Karl Anthony Towns is fine. I don't want to prioritize him as much as I would prefer Rudy Gobert. So Gobert, I want to at least be around field weight. Ideally, would be a little bit over the field on him. 6,900 just still feels a little too cheap for a guy that can produce the way he can when everything's going well for him. So I'm comfortable being a little bit over the field, considering not doing a potential leverage play for Gobert tonight, but we'll just keep a close eye on that. And then Walker Alexander has been fine. He's been doing well at a lower price tag here recently. Once again, not a guy that I want to have show up as like a core play or anything like that for me. He's just a super low usage guy at 12%. He needs all of the minutes he can handle, and he's been getting those minutes here recently. He's been playing around 28 minutes, 33 minutes. So we've seen a nice increase there, which just makes him a bit more viable. So not someone you want to show up in all of your lines, but I'm okay with him showing up in 20, 30% of my lines, that kind of thing. Yeah, JJ, like this is just a good game where I'm comfortable playing the Timberwolves side of it. The Kings, I'm okay playing the value side of it. It's just one of those situations where it's just a good game to target. Next up, we have not the opposite, but a scary game to target. The spread is nice, 245, or I mean, the total is nice at 245, but the spread is the widest on this slate, and for good reason. Bucks against the Wizards, we all know how bad the Wizards are. Is gonna be close to impossible for them to keep this game close, I would assume. But I do still like some pieces here. For first and foremost, I'm totally fine going right back to Jordan Poole. He's still cheap in the 6,800 range, even when he starts off slow, like he did against the Hornets. He was still able to be fine by the end of the slate just because of how involved he is on this team. Don't look at his field goal percentages though; it's bad. But he has one of the highest usage rates on this team at 28%, and so totally fine playing him. Just really cheap. And we like playing guards against the Bucks too. That trend has been going very well for us this season, so we can keep that up. So Poole, honestly, probably going to be a leverage play for me tonight, but we'll keep a close eye on what else happens. Outside of Poole, I mean, Kuzma is obviously viable, but I don't think I'm trying to play any of these guys. Gafford, it looks like he's getting a little bit of ownership, but I'm not a big fan of it. The Bucks side, it's tough. It is tough. Let's see. Do we have injury news here? Giannis is probable, so assuming he plays, I'm not overly concerned. Damian Lillard hasn't really had a ton of ceiling games with Giannis, so not really trying to force that. Giannis is just really expensive. The widespread is really hard for me to make an argument there. The main thing, if you're playing Giannis or Damian tonight, is just because this is an extremely soft matchup, and any of these guys can go off in a soft matchup. I don't foresee myself forcing exposure to these guys just because of the spread. Makes it a little bit less likely they have those ceiling performances. If Giannis was a little bit cheaper, I'll be willing to take a shot, but don't love it. Brook Lopez, I am so comfortable with. We like playing bigs against Washington, and he's only 5,800, so I do like Brook Lopez here. Uh, JJ, I see you with Chris Middleton. I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous about playing Chris Middleton tonight. And the main reason again, and we've seen this trend happen throughout the slate, is just lack of sample size. So last game against Boston, we saw Chris Middleton finally see 28 minutes. Up until that point, he didn't see more than 23 minutes. It does look like the minutes are trending up for him. And so I like Chris Middleton. He's 5,700. He's cheap. He makes a lot work. But my concern with him is just that if this game blows out, he's going to be the first one off the court. And also, with him being 5,700, if the price tag is nice, like I said, but sometimes Chris Middleton, if his shot's not falling early and it's Giannis or Lillard or Lopez or Portis even really being the one that's causing the blowout, it could be a really bad situation for Middleton. So, like I said, I like Middleton, but I am not going to allow him to be a core play for me just because I know that risk is there. And we've only seen him see more than 25 minutes once at this point against Boston, which was a matchup, they wanted to really have a guy like Middleton out there for because it's a potential playoff matchup. So, like I said, just be careful here. It's possible, and we'll see on the pre-lock show, that I could be over the field on Middleton still, but I'm just not going to allow him to be a core play. I get that. More comfortable with Middleton than Hield. I think I agree with that too, to be honest, JJ. I do think Chris Middleton, I trust the situation a bit more than Buddy, but I'll probably have exposure to both and not feel great about both. Sometimes you just got to ignore your brain telling you things are crazy. Was Middleton low owned? I don't think so. I think he's a little chalky. Yeah, Middleton's at 17%, which isn't bad, but it's not low owned. But Giannis at 10 too, or 11. It's not really low ownership on a 8-game slate, but I hear you. There definitely will be people not playing them, Jorge, because of the spread. And like I said, super soft matchup. I think you can take your shots here. I don't think it's crazy. I just probably won't. Next up, we have a game I do like more than most, probably. We have the Nuggets against the Rockets. Pretty low total game, but the spread is the closest on the slate. Don't really understand the spread, to be honest, guys, but I'm not going to question it. I like the Nuggets here. We know that once Murray's out, I have more trust in Aaron Gordon, have more trust in Michael Porter Jr., and Jokic is just in consideration on every single slate. I can promise you I will have exposure to Jokic tonight. I don't think that's a secret. Now, he's 3.6% owned. That's super low ownership, and that's because of his price tag. It's really hard to pay up for him tonight. He has to smash at that price tag. But like I said, he's 3% owned. I'll have probably 5 to 10%. So I don't like writing him up anymore on my leverage play sheets because I'm just always over the field on him, especially when he's low owned. And so I'm willing to go right back to that here again. Next up, we have MPJ and Aaron Gordon. They're not going to stand out for you much from like a ownership standpoint or a projection standpoint, anything like that. But the sim model does still like them both. Michael Porter Jr. and Aaron Gordon. And so once again, I will be over the field to both of them, and that will be super easy for me with them being this low owned. I'll probably write up one of them, whoever I end up having a stronger lean on by the time I get to the pre-lock show, but I like this team significantly more than the field does. And then on the Rocket side of things, I think Şengün is fine. I never like playing opposing bigs, whoever Jokic is going up against. It just usually doesn't go well unless it's who did he used to play with? I'm blanking on it. But there's one big who they would always have really good high scoring games. But typically it's just not a part of my process. Fred VanVleet, I do like a bit more. He's seeing some ownership at 12%, but he's only 8,100. I think we can play guards against the Nuggets again. Who was it on Wednesday that they went up against? I think it was Cade. Cade Cunningham is coming off a very strong performance against the Nuggets. I think this is a weak point for them, and I think this is a nice mid-range, high upside, decent ownership play with Fred VanVleet. Outside of that, like I said, I understand the Şengün play. I don't love any of these other guys. I think we have other value options with guys like Middleton, Hield, hopefully more the Kings value. We have other guys we can play. I'm not trying to play the Rockets. Spurs against the Golden State Warriors. I don't like any of these Spurs. I have a like on Victor Wembanyama. I wanted to keep a close eye on his ownership. If that goes lower, I would consider him as a viable leverage play, but ultimately I'm not seeing myself getting to any of these Spurs tonight unless it just happens naturally and the DS is on it a bit more than I am. Jorge said, any love for Reggie Jackson? Honestly, not right now. We were on him, was it earlier this week or last week? I don't even remember anymore. But he is a bit more viable on slates when we're desperate for value, and he's one of the higher usage guards on a slate. For me, 5,400 is a decent price tag. I'll look him up in the sim. 5,400. Reggie Jackson. Yeah, he has some upside ability. Again, like very similar play to like a Mike Conley. If he's like a last piece for you, I'm fine with it, but there's still other guards I like a bit more. For the Rocket side, like I said, I'm really only looking at Fred VanVleet. I understand taking some shots here on some of these guys, but don't love them. Oh, I backtracked. Spurs, yeah, only Victor Wembanyama. Not looking at anyone else. Warriors, Curry, totally fine. Chris Paul is projecting decently as a points per dollar play, but I don't like it personally. Same thing with Clay. Looks like he's projecting all right. Don't love it. If I get a little bit of exposure to Chris Paul, I'm not going to take him out of my player pool or anything like that, but I don't want more than 20% probably. And then ideally, I'm not getting any Clay. Yeah, for me, it's really just Curry here, and I'm willing to force him in my lineups if need be. All right, last game on the slate, we have the Pelicans against the Clippers. For the Pelicans, I do like Brandon Ingram and Zion today. By the time we get to the pre-lock show, I'm probably going to have a stronger lean on one of them. Right now, just looking at the sim, it likes Zion a little bit, 1.5% chance of hitting 8x. And then Brandon Ingram at 8,600 is right there with him. And it looks like it wants to prioritize Zion. And I don't hate that. It makes me a little nervous not having Ingram on a slate, especially the hammer game. But it looks like this game's not getting a lot of ownership anyway. So I'll just go heavier on Zion unless things change dramatically for me. And then I don't love any of the other pieces from this game. Yeah, Darius, exactly. With Curry, it's really just him and a lot of other random people doing cardio out there and trying to figure out how they can get Curry involved. So it would make, for most teams, having a guy like Draymond out, it would make sense to play other pieces, but it's hard for me to logic my way around it. Thomas, good to see you, man. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. All right. Clipper side of things, we should get exposure to James Harden naturally. He's projecting well at Domination Station, so I don't think we'll have to force exposure to him. But my guy's been solid. We started off hating on James Harden, but he is starting to come into form, which is nice. He did start a little slow last game, but he was still able to get 40 points, which is nice. He is finally in that 8K range, so he's no longer that cheap 7.8, $7.9 thousand play. But at 8,100, he still projects well, better than Kawhi even, which is wild. Let's make sure I'm not missing anything there. Yeah, Kawhi's been a little bit more up and down with some 50-point performers in between, but his strong games have really just come in some slightly softer matchups for him, at least. So I do think Leonard would be your pivot off of Harden. Harden hasn't had a 50-point performance. The ownership's not that different. Yeah, I don't know. I want to look a little closer at this because James Harden is projecting better, but I'm interested in potentially pivoting off Kawhi Leonard. But the ownership is right there, so close to each other that it's just going to take a closer look. I do know I like Paul George more or the most in this situation, so I'll make sure I have exposure to him and then decide which way I'm going, Leonard or Harden, on the pre-lock show. And then outside of that, again, I think we can get most of our value in some of these earlier games. And then, especially if we get some news from Chicago or the Heat, this slate could be interesting. I'm hoping that we have some decent value so we can pay up to like your Jokic's, your Curry's, guys like that who I do want exposure to on this slate. And then, like JJ mentioned, or it might have been Jorge actually, you can also use Giannis as kind of like your low owned pay up option if we do get more value on this slate. But we'll have to wait and see. I think it should be a fun one, though. So look forward to seeing you all on the pre-lock show. If you all are not able to make that, then I look forward to seeing you all on Monday where we do it all over again. Good luck, guys. Peace out.